Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and it's time for the green set review. We are into the last colored set review. Tomorrow, of course, we will cover the colorless cards, the land cards, and the multicolored cards. But today we're going to jump into green. Quick reminder, this is a limited set review, not talking about constructed. But let's get on into that first card. Up first, we have Backwoods Survivalist. Backwoods Survivalists are 3 and a green for a creature, human warrior at common. They're a 4/3. And they have Delirium. They say Backwoods Survivalist gets +1/+1 and has Trample as long as you have Delirium. So we're looking at a 4/3 for 4 that later in the game will be a 5/4 for 4 with Trample. So 5/4 for 4 with Trample is pretty good. I would play that card. But it is not guaranteed to be that card. And it looks like Delirium maybe will be slightly harder to get. You know, there's only one pack where you're going to get your Vessel of Nascencies, your Creeping Sensations, your things like that. There's not quite as many ways to quickly enable Delirium in this format, it looks like. So I wouldn't just assume that Delirium is on. I would assume that this is a 4/3 for 4, and sometimes it gets a little bit better. If you build very specifically, it gets a little bit better. Ultimately, this just doesn't quite feel like it's there. It feels fine, don't get me wrong. I think you'll probably always play the first one just because it's a creature that's, you know, decently on par with the vanilla test. So I think it is a C+, but I don't think it's much better than that. I don't think you can just assume that Delirium's always going to be on. This is always going to be a 5/4 trampler. I think a good deal of the time it's going to be a 4/3 dumb, big, or medium-sized thing. So C+. Up next, we have Blood Briar. Blood Briar is 2 and a green for a creature plant elemental at common. It's a 2/3, and it says whenever you sacrifice another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Briar. There are a good deal more sack outlets in this format, but I'm not sure if a true sacrifice deck exists, and certainly not in green. I think the fact that this is at common is a little bit of a clue that this deck doesn't solidly exist, because if it did, this would probably be more of an uncommon for limited. Do note that this does include clues, because you do sacrifice a clue when you pay that 2 mana and draw a card. But with only one pack of Shadows of Innistrad, the clue deck is basically dead. It's not going to exist outside of you very luckily opening an Ongoing Investigations or Alvin Mysteries. So you should never expect that you're going to be heavy into clues. You should never really expect you're going to have a clue at all. So I just don't see Blood Briar as being a legitimate card in this set. If it was, I don't think it would be at common. So I've got to go with a C- on it. I think you probably should cut this more often than you play it. Up next, we have Clear Shot. Clear Shot is 2 and a green for an instant at uncommon. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. But there's more. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So Rabid Bite was fantastic and totally first pickable. This costs 1 more mana and lets you do that at instant speed. And it gives you a +1/+1 pump. This is ridiculous. This should be a snap first pick in a large number of packs over many of the rares in this set. This is just super, super, super good. I'm honestly a little bit surprised at the power level here. This is fantastic. This is a snap first pick, quite possibly simply the best uncommon in the set. So Clear Shot is going to get a solid A-. The only reason it doesn't get a full A is because you have to have a creature, they have to have a creature. There's a minor restriction, but just solid. First pick this card, almost always A-. Next up, we have Crop Sigil. Crop Sigil is a single green for an enchantment at uncommon. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put the top card of your library into your graveyard. Delirium. Pay 2 and a green and sacrifice Crop Sigil. Return up to 1 target creature card and up to 1 target land card from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only if you have Delirium. I don't really care too much for cards like Macabre Waltz. We've talked about that through and through and through. An enchantment that ultimately costs me 4 mana to get a creature and a land in my hand seems way too slow, especially because you have to have Delirium on. Milling a single card a turn just seems way too slow, way too slow of a way to enable Delirium or any sort of graveyard shenanigans. I feel like this is a trap card for people who think they want to go into Delirium and they see this and they go, aha, this will do it for me. I think it's way too slow. I think this is a D. I'm not going to touch this card ever. Next up, we have Crossroads Consecrator. Crossroads Consecrator is a single green mana for a creature human cleric at common. It's a 1/2. You can pay green and tap it to give target attacking human +1/+1 until end of turn. So this effect usually doesn't cost mana, and it usually doesn't have a subtype restriction. It's usually tap target attacking creature gets +1/+1. We recently saw this on Anointer of Champions in Origins. That makes this less good than Anointer of Champions, but it is still pretty decent, especially in a green-white humans deck. In that deck, it's probably a one of include, like auto-include, but outside of that deck, I'm not sure if you really want it. You need to have a real critical mass of humans, and you need to be relatively certain that you're going to be the beatdown in order for this card to be really, really, really good. So I think it is going to get cut a lot of the times. If you're in green-white, it's probably going to be a little bit more of an auto-include. So I'm going to go with a C- on it for the average deck. In the green-white deck, it's more like a C+. Not even much bigger than that. The mana cost is real. The mana cost is definitely real. So, yeah, C-. Up next, we have Eldritch Evolution. Eldritch Evolution is 1 green for a sorcery at rare. It says, as an additional cost to cast Eldritch Evolution, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Exile Eldritch Evolution. This is interesting. It's like a single-use Eldrazi birthing pod of sorts. Now, as kind of a flavor fail, the Emerge creatures are probably one of your best sacrifice options here, because it would basically be enough casting cost to let you get whatever creature you want. You know, doing a 3-drop off of this will get you a 5-drop, which may or may not be where your bomb lives. Your bombs are typically going to live more like 6 drops of sorts, and even higher, especially in green. So I'm not ultimately sure exactly how this is going to play out. You do need creatures that are within 2 CMC of whatever you're trying to get, so make sure that you do keep that in mind when you are building your deck. If you have no way of getting the creature that you want, you probably shouldn't be playing this. I don't know. I just don't know. Because, of course, you need to have not drawn the creature yet that you want to make sure that you hit with this. There's a lot that has to happen for this to be amazing. It'll never really be a dead card outside of when you have an empty board, but its power does 100% rely on what's left in your library. I think it'll be fun. I do want to try it at least once, but I have no idea how good it's going to be. I'm going to start at a C+ on it. It could be much higher. It could be much lower. I just don't know about this card. I don't know at all, but I'll start with a C+, and I definitely do want to try it. Next up is Emrakul's Evangel. Emrakul's Evangel is 2 and a green for a creature human horror at rare. It's a 3/2. You can tap and sacrifice Emrakul's Evangel and any number of other non-Eldrazi creatures. Put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token onto the battlefield for each creature sacrificed this way. If you can jam out a ton of tokens somehow, this will probably have some good use, but beyond that, I don't think this is going to be very good in limited. Constructed, yeah, you can build a good tokens deck and have a play set of these, and your plan can go off. Your synergy can work. It's much harder to really go off with this in limited, though. I feel like this would really require me to turn a minimum of like 3 1/1s into 3 2s for this to be something like bomb status or even great status. Unless that token deck does exist in this format, and I'm still torn as to whether or not it truly exists. This is really going to be a fairly vanilla 3/2 for 3 that sometimes replaces itself and sometimes more. I think it's always playable, but in no way super special. So I'm going to go with a C+ on it. I just don't see it being any higher than that unless a really good tokens deck exists, and I'm not quite seeing that just yet. Up next is Emrakul's Influence. Emrakul's Influence is 2 green for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, draw 2 cards. Drawing 2 cards sounds awesome, but this really should be a last pick. If you have more than 1 7-drop in your deck, you're either the amazing Emerge deck that may or may not exist with several 7-drop and higher creatures. I don't even know how many Emerge creatures you want for the Emerge deck. But if you have that many 7-drops in your deck, something probably went wrong. And spending 4 mana on an enchantment to, at some point late in the game, when you're casting creatures big enough that should be winning you the game, 2 cards just doesn't seem like anything. This does not look to me to be in any way worth it. This should be a last pick. I've got to go with an F on it. I don't think you should ever play this card. Up next, we have Foul Emissary. Foul Emissary is 2 and a green for a creature human horror at uncommon. It's a 1/1. When Foul Emissary enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. When you sacrifice Foul Emissary while casting a spell with Emerge, put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token onto the battlefield. I'm not sold on this guy either. The ability is nice. The first ability is nice, but you are paying 3 mana for a 1/1. Unless you do have some emerge creatures. And I don't think 1 emerge creature is enough. I think you need to be pretty confident that you're going to be emerging with this guy. Like, you need to be really confident that you're doing that. And that's going to probably require at least 2 or 3. And as I said, I don't know what the blue-green emerge deck looks like just yet. But I think you have to be in that deck to play this guy. The first ability is nice, but it's not worth playing a 1/1. Once you're in that deck, if it exists, if it works, if it does have a critical mass of emerge creatures, then maybe this does become a little bit decent, because you get a free 3/2. Or I guess technically you get a 3/2 for 3. Plus you get the emerge creature. But I really do feel like this should be a later pack pickup for that deck, because I don't think anybody else should really play this. So in the average deck, I think this is kind of like a D. In the emerge deck, I think this is kind of like a C+. I'm going to have to see how that emerge deck plays out. I definitely do want to try it. I think it could be good, but I don't know where this guy fits into it. So D/C+. Up next, we have Nara Would Dry. Nara Would Dry is a single green mana for a creature Dryad Horror at uncommon. It's a 1/1. It's got Death Touch. It also has Delirium. Nara Would Dryad gets +2/+2 as long as you have Delirium. So it's a 1/1 for 1 with Death Touch, which is Typhoid Rats from the original Innistrad and a couple of other sets since then, which were always totally and utterly playable. Like totally fine. Always playable. Though not a super high pick, more of a mid-pack kind of deal. The fact that at some point this will hopefully be a 3/3 and become a decent attacker with Death Touch is really solid. I still think this should be a mid-pack pickup, but it should be a mid-pack pickup for any green deck. If you can push Delirium, great, but you don't even have to do that for this to be playable. So C+ for me, very solid card. Glad to see Typhoid Rats back in a different color and a different format. Up next is Grapple with the Past. Grapple with the Past is 1 and a green for an instant at common. Put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may return a creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. This might be alright if you have a way, or if you want a way to enable Delirium, especially with only 1 pack of Vessels of Nascency kicking around. This effect is almost always fine. We've seen it a ton of times before, and it's usually okay-ish. If you're in the deck that can take an advantage of it, and you have a spot for it, then take it. But otherwise, you probably want to pass on it. The fact that it's an instant is really quite nice. I'm going to go with a solid C here. I think you're fine playing this, and I think you're fine cutting it. Next up is Hamlet Captain, 1 and a green for a creature human warrior at uncommon. It's a 2/2, whenever Hamlet Captain attacks or blocks, other humans you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Hamlet Captain was amazing and is going to be amazing again. Hamlet Captain is from the original Innistrad, and it was fantastic there, and there's just as many humans kicking around in this set. It's a 2/2 for 2 with an upside, which is always a C+, just totally solid and 100% playable. And this is a very sizable upside in many green decks, and just incredible in green-white. This should be a relatively high pick for almost anyone, and it should be a snap pick for anybody who's even slightly trending towards green-white. It's not a bomb, but it is a very high-value, solid creature. It's going to be a solid B for me, obviously a little bit higher in green-white, like a B+. This card's really good. You really shouldn't be passing this card unless you're not in green. So, a B for Hamlet Captain. Up next, we have Ishkanegraph Widow. Ishkanegraph Widow is 4 and a green for a legendary creature spider at Mythic. It's a 3/5. It has reach. It has Delirium. When Ishkanegraph Widow enters the battlefield, if you have Delirium, put 3 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach onto the battlefield. And then for 6 and a black, target opponent loses 1 life for each spider you control, which is going to be at least 1, hopefully 4, maybe more. Probably not in this set, though. Let's be honest, this is for the EDH crowd. This is so that there can be a spider commander for all the spider decks in Commander. That's it. For limited, it's a 3/5 reach for 5, which is fine. If you have Delirium, it's sort of a 6/11 with reach, which is pretty good against a board of flyers. Those 1/2s aren't going to do too much else otherwise. 3 1/2 spiders is not what the spider spawning deck did in Innistrad. This just doesn't feel like a great top end for me. It doesn't really win you a game, The mana sink is ridiculous. I don't see this being great. I see this being a fine sideboard card. I see this being a fine card in sealed, but it feels like it's going to function primarily as kind of a common spider, maybe just an uncommon spider. It makes me sad. I would love to see a legendary spider that's a crazy limited bomb, but this just isn't it. I think it's generally passable in the early pack even. I'm going to go with a C+ on it. I don't think it's any better than that. I don't think it's that good. So C+ for Ishkanegraph. Amazing in Commander, or at least something Commander has wanted for a while. Limited, C+. Up next, we have Kecak Prowler. Kecak Prowler is a single green mana for a creature werewolf horror at uncommon. It's a 2/1, and you can pay 4 and a green to transform Kecak Prowler. Kecak Prowler turns into Sinuous Predator. Sinuous Predator is a creature Eldrazi wolf. It's a 4/4, and it can't be blocked by more than one creature, so it has, like, reverse menace of a sort. This seems nice and aggressive. A 2/1 for 1 is one of my favorite stats for a good aggressive creature. Usually you see that in white, maybe in black, maybe in red. A little later in the game, or if you play this as a 5 and a green, so you play it and immediately transform it, you get yourself a 4/4 that eats creatures left and right. Seems solid. I'll play this probably every single time I have them and pick them somewhat highly, probably like high mid-pack, so we're talking like pick 5-ish. Looks like a totally fine creature to me, always includable unless you are just utterly not going to be attacking in the early game. So B- for me, seems very good. Next up, we have Noose Constrictor. Noose Constrictor is 1 and a green for a creature snake at uncommon. It's a 2/2, it has reach. Discard a card, Noose Constrictor gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is basically Wild Mongrel, which is one of the best discard outlets there is, and a cube staple usually. Wild Mongrels were the same casting cost, the same power. They were dogs or hounds or beasts or something instead of a snake. They didn't have reach, but when you discarded a card and pumped them, they got to change their color for the turn. This just seems like a solid upgrade. Reach is way better than changing the color of the creature for the turn. The downside, of course, is that green doesn't have madness. So there's not, half your deck is not going to be madness, which is what this wants to be doing in this set. So really it ends up being similar to Stern Constable's problem, which is that this isn't a color that wants to enable Delirium, but discarding to enable Delirium is not the best of plans. It's way better if cards end up in your graveyard for better reasons than that. But +1/+1's fine, that's some decent value, so you can get in there. And if you are in green-red and have some madness, or if you are in green-black and have some madness, then there are some things that you can do. I don't think this is first pickable, but I think I will still be pretty happy to see it a few picks in, kind of mid-pack, and I'll probably play them all because, at the end of the day, they are a bear with a couple of very solid upsides. So C+ for me. I think they're pretty darn solid. I just wish they were red or black in the madness colors. Next up, we have Permeating Mass. Permeating Mass is a single green mana for a 1/3 creature spirit at rare. Permeating Mass says some weird words. It says whenever Permeating Mass deals combat damage to a creature, that creature becomes a copy of Permeating Mass. So that creature stops being whatever color it is, whatever CMC it is, whatever type it is, whatever power and toughness it is, and it just becomes a copy of this card and nothing else. This card's awesome. It's so accurately mechanically capturing the flavor of something just slowly spreading and engulfing everything. Do I like it? I don't think so. Like in the game, as a magic card that I want to play, I don't think I like it. I'm pretty sure this is actually nearly unplayable. It seems decent. Your opponent will not want to attack you with their bomb, because then it just becomes a permeating mass, right? Right. But if they do, then they have one. And then you don't want to attack into it, because your bomb becomes a permeating mass. And then everything just becomes a permeating mass, and nothing happens in the game until somebody gets a flyer and wins. I don't think I like this. It's going to rapidly result in games just becoming a stall of permeating masses and creatures that don't want to become a permeating mass. I want to see what happens with it, but I just can't see it being good unless it's perhaps paired with flyers. So like a green-white deck or a green-blue deck. But I don't know. I don't know about this card. I'm going to start out on this card. I'm going to keep an eye on it, but I'm going to start at a C-. I think I'll cut it pretty reliably. Next up, we have Prey Upon, another card back from the original Innistrad. Prey Upon is a single green mana for a sorcery at common. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. This is the original fight card. This is when fight became a word. This is as basic a fight card as you can get, and I expect there's going to be some initial distaste for it from newer players who have just seen the fight cards that pump. You know, Savage Punch or whatever it was from Cons or Cons Block. And comparing it to that, yeah, it doesn't look quite as good. But this costs a single mana. That's as low cost as you can possibly hope for. We're never going to have a 0 casting cost fight spell. It's likely not always first pickable like Rabid Bite was or like Clear Shot will definitely be. But it's always playable and it's always solid. I am willing to give it a B-. It's good. Don't let the simplicity of it scare you away. It is good. Next up, we have Primal Druid. Primal Druid is 1 and a green for a creature human druid at common. It's an 0/3, and it says when Primal Druid dies, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This seems pretty mediocre to me. Letting your opponent, generally, be the one who decides when you ramp probably isn't the best of plans. There's a potential upside here with a merge, but still probably just isn't worth it. I have a feeling 3-drops are going to be like the key thing that you want to emerge with, because you can go 3-drop, and then a lot of the emerges are 7 mana, which means you sack your 3-drop, you play your 4th land, you cast your 7-drop emerge. I don't know that 2-drops are going to be great emerge targets. I'm going to be cutting these pretty reliably to start with. I just don't see them working out most of the time. They're a decent blocker, which is what a ramp deck kind of looks for sometimes, but the fact that the ramp doesn't come until it dies is not good. So C-, I'm going to cut these pretty liberally. Up next, we have Shrill Howler. Shrill Howler is 2 and a green for a creature, Werewolf Horror at uncommon. It's a 3/1. It says creatures with power less than Shrill Howler's power can't block it. Pay 5 and a green, transform Shrill Howler. It turns into Howling Chorus, one of my favorite pieces of art in this set. Creature Eldrazi Werewolf at a 3/5. Creatures with power less than Howling Chorus's power can't block it. Whenever Howling Chorus deals combat damage to a player, put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horror creature token onto the battlefield. This seems pretty solid. It's a 3/1 for 3, which is a little bit weak, but nicely aggressive. However, not being able to be blocked by anything with 2 or less power should help it negate the downside of it being 1 toughness, and its potential to trade down. This should make it a solid enough creature on the front side, and if you can flip it with that 6 mana, it becomes a real beating. A 3/5 that can't be chump blocked, and if it hits, it just continues widening your board with 3/2s, seems huge to me. The 6 mana transform cost is slightly high, but not high enough for this to be downgraded at all. I think this is going to be really solid. I will always play it. I'm going to look to pick this fairly highly. I'm going to go pretty bullish with this with a B. I really like Shrill Howler and Howling Chorus, so solid B from me. Next up, we have Sombre Waltz Tag. Sombre Waltz Tag is 3 green for a creature elk at uncommon. It's a 4/3. When Sombre Waltz Tag enters the battlefield, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. Seems pretty solid. It's a 4/3 for 5, which is a little overcosted, but it gets a free Prey Upon attached to it. Or I guess, realistically, you're paying for that Prey Upon with the extra green mana. I do worry that a lot of 3-drops trade with this, but it is a May, so you will always have the choice as to whether or not to fight, and you will have the choice of what to fight. So it's never going to hopefully trade. Hopefully you're not that scared of whatever 3-power thing there is on the other side of the board. So at worst, it's an overcosted 4/3, and at best, it's a 4/3 that kills a 2/4 or lower. Seems like a solid pick to me, probably shy of first pickable, but it's always includable, so I'm going to go with a B on it. Up next, we have Spirit of the Hunt. Spirit of the Hunt is a 1 green creature, wolf spirit at rare. It's a 3/3, it's got flash, and when Spirit of the Hunt enters the battlefield, each other creature you control that's a wolf or a werewolf gets +0/+3 until end of turn. It's a 3/3 flash for 3, which is playable right then and there. Take it. Any green deck will be happy playing this card, but it'll shine a little bit brighter in the red-green werewolf decks, and it looks like there's enough wolves and werewolves still kicking around that deck will still exist with all the synergies intact. But it can hopefully set up some combats where your opponent thinks they're getting trades, or maybe getting in for damage, or maybe getting chump blocks, but instead, they're just going to lose their whole side. Or, at worst, you totally stonewall them, and still probably pick out some things. Probably not truly first pickable, but always playable. Removal will likely trump this at the pack 1 pick 1 level, as will any sort of like super endgame bomb, but it'll still be a fairly early pick in the pack. I'm willing to go with a solid B. Next up, we have Splendid Reclamation. Splendid Reclamation is 3 and a green for a sorcery at rare. Return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Nope. Totally unplayable and limited. By the time this becomes castable, by the time you have a bunch of lands in the graveyard, you shouldn't really need to have more. This isn't worth a card. It should be last pick. Probably has a constructed home somewhere, somehow, but in limited, absolutely not. Stone cold, solid F. Don't touch this card. Up next, we have Spring Sage Ritual. Spring Sage Ritual is 3 and a green for an instant at common. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. You gain 4 life. Pure sideboard. There's zero reason that I've seen in this format or Shadows to main deck artifact or enchantment destruction. Don't ever play this. Don't ever intentionally take this over any other playable card for your deck. Put it in the sideboard. Keep it there. Remember that you have it, but don't main deck it. Pure D. Up next, we have Swift Spinner. Swift Spinner is 3 and a green for a creature spider at common. It's a 2/3. It has flash and it has reach, and that's about it. It is a surprise spider. It seems decent, although it probably should live in your sideboard a little bit, some of the times. Probably a bit more playable and sealed just due to lesser card quality. It's a nice little surprise that can eat a number of flyers like spirits and things like that and still live. Blocks on the ground decently as well. I think you can always play it, but you should probably side it out if you have better stuff and side it in when you feel you need some more defense or you're up against some pesky flyers. It'd be awesome if it had Death Touch, but no such luck. So I think it's kind of like a C. I think you probably should sideboard this a number of times, and you probably can play it a number of times as well. So solid C. Up next, we have Tango Claw Werewolf. Tango Claw Werewolf is 2 green for a creature werewolf horror at uncommon. It's a 2/4, and it says Tango Claw Werewolf can block an additional creature each combat. Pay 6 and a green, transform Tango Claw Werewolf. Tango Claw Werewolf turns into Fibrous Entangler. Fibrous Entangler is a creature Eldrazi werewolf. It's a 4/6. It has vigilance. It must be blocked if able, and it can block an additional creature each combat still. So a 2/4 for 4 is normal, if unassuming, and being able to block a second creature could be relevant against a heavy aggro deck. The double green is a little bit of a pain. The transform cost is kind of sizable at 7 mana, but the backside is really quite nice. A 4/6 vigilance attacks and blocks really well, especially because it still has that can block an additional creature each combat bit of rules text there. In addition, the fact that it must be blocked means that it's hopefully going to be eating an opponent's creatures turn by turn. I really like the flip side. It's just the front side is a little bit weak and overcosted to me. I think you'll probably always play it. I think it'll be much better in pre-release and sealed. Realistically, I think it's like a B- at best. I wish I could just have the backside. The backside's really good. Front side, not quite as good. I'm going to go with a B-. I think you do still always play it, but it's not super exciting until you get to the backside. Up next, we have Ulvenwald Captive. Ulvenwald Captive is 1 and a green for a creature werewolf horror at common. It's a 1/2. It has Defender. You can tap to add green to your mana pool. You can pay 5 green to transform Ulvenwald Captive. Notable, you can use him to pay the cost. So virtually it costs 5 and a green. But it turns into Ulvenwald Abomination. Ulvenwald Abomination is a creature Eldrazi werewolf. It's a 4/6. Tap it to add colorless to your mana pool. This is cool. This is a common mana dork, which is something that I've been looking for in draft for the last set for sure. It's a common mana dork that can block 1/2 creatures, or 1/3 creatures, or 1x creatures is even better. Stops all those skulkers at 1 mana. It's a 1 green mana dork with 2 toughness, and that's already a decently high pick in most formats, and should be in this one as well. The transform, I don't really care about. 7 mana can be spent in way better ways, and if you have the mana to flip this for 7, getting a 4/6 is okay. At that point, the extra mana is pointless outside of maybe casting an Emrakul. Still, I'm pretty happy to see the common mana dork. I don't foresee ever really flipping this unless I just have nothing better to do with my time. But I love the front side. The front side is just super fantastic. I will be highly picking these when I see them. B-, I think they're a great addition to the format. Up next is Alvin Observer. Alvin Observer is a 4 green creature tree folk at rare. It's a 6/6, and it says whenever a creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies, draw yourself a card. 6/6s for 6 past the vanilla test technically, but you're getting into the this is just a big dumb creature that hurts my hand pre-turn 6 kind of area. The ability seems pretty worthless as well. Drawing a card is great, but if you have a bunch of 4+ toughness creatures dying, I don't know what situation you're in. You're in a pretty bad situation. I guess getting a draw is fine, but I don't like the casting cost on this. The ability just seems so low impact at such a specific point and situation of a game that I don't see myself picking this. It's an okay ramp target, I guess, but otherwise, I'm out on it. I'm going to give it a C-. Up next, we have Waxing Moon. Waxing Moon is 1 and a green for an instant at common. Transform up to 1 target werewolf you control. Creatures you control gain trample until end of turn. Can't think of any werewolf I'd want to use this on. Yeah, the flip side of werewolves are generally pretty cool, but spending a card and 2 mana to get to them does not seem worth it to me. I'm not going to be playing this much, even in a red-green werewolves deck. Maybe if I had a bunch of the new ones, and this is obviously a cheaper way to flip them, but it's still a card, and that card is the big problem for me. So I've got to go with a D. I don't think I'll ever really play this. I'll keep an eye on it, but I don't think it's gonna work out. I think it's a trap card for newer players. Next up, we have Wolfkin Bond. Wolfkin Bond is 4 and a green for an enchantment aura at common. It says, enchant creature. When Wolfkin Bond enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2. So this is going to, and already has gotten a ton of comparisons to Knightly Valor, because it is almost basically Knightly Valor. We get a wolf without vigilance instead of a knight with vigilance, and our creature doesn't get vigilance either. And that's about it for differences. And I personally think those are fairly big differences, especially because it's the exact same casting cost as Knightly Valor. Vigilance is a real kind of massive part of Knightly Valor. Yeah, it makes your creature bigger as a 2/2, and yeah, it replaces itself. So even if you get blown out, you still have that 2/2 knight. But the fact that your big creature could now attack and block was a really big part of Knightly Valor. I don't think Wolfkin Bond is nearly as good as Knightly Valor. I think it is definitely a step down. Knightly Valor was sometimes first pickable, and it was always playable, and it was very highly pickable at a minimum. I think this is going to be definitely dropping down. I think this is going to be much more kind of finely playable if you want to, but I think your general draft deck should have better cards in it than this. So I am going to go with a C- on it. That's a little bit low from some of the ratings that I've seen, but I just think that losing vigilance on both creatures is a sizable drop down from Knightly Valor, so I've got to go with a C- for Wolfkin Bond. Next up, we have Woodcutter's Grit. Woodcutter's Grit is 2 and a green for an instant at common. It says, target creature you control gets +3/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn. This seems really expensive. Ranger's Guile from Innistrad was the same thing, but it was 1 green mana. Just a single green mana. It gave +1/+1 and hexproof, and that was actually decent. That was usually playable as a good combat trick, as a way to maybe get a little boost of power and toughness, but primarily to stop removal and to stop anything like that from happening. 3 mana is an awful lot more to pay for hexproof, because a lot of the times that you were using this ability, you were using it as hexproof, and the pump was often irrelevant unless it was during combat. And so this is really you paying 3 mana for hexproof, or you paying 3 mana for +3/+3, and both those are grossly overcosted. The one place this becomes a little bit better is in combat, where somebody tries to kill something or do something in combat, and then you get a little bit of a blowout. But that is a relatively narrow condition for this card. So I am going to start cutting this card a little more often than I play it, so it is kind of C-ish. I think sometimes you could play it, and in sealed it's probably going to be a little bit better, but in draft, C-. All right, the last card of green, the last mono-colored card, is Woodland Patrol. Woodland Patrol is 2 and a green for a creature human scout at common. It's a 3/2, and it has vigilance, and that is all. It's slightly better than your usual 3/2 for 3, but not enough for me to give a full upgrade from a C. Vigilance is cool and all. I like it, but vigilance is good on creatures that it can attack very well and block very well. This can attack decently. It cannot block decently. So why bother having Vigilance? Play it here, cut it there. Solid C. So that's going to wrap it up for green. Green looks pretty interesting. There's a number of cards I want to play with. I'm really interested in how the new werewolf mechanic's going to play out. And it looks like there's just a lot of kind of Bs and B minuses and B pluses. There's not many As. There's really just Clear Shot, which looks incredible. But there's a lot of just solid creatures. So I'm really happy to pair green with something. I don't know if it's going to be fantastic by itself, but paired with something, obviously white for sure, probably red, probably green, even blue, if a merge really is a thing, could be a good thing. I think green's going to live as a support color, and I think it's going to do a pretty darn good job at that. So let me know in the comments down below what your favorite green cards are, what you want to play with, what I got wrong, what you disagree with, what you agree with, anything, let me know down there. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at TheManaLeek. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeek and Twitch.tv/TheManaLeek. You found me here on YouTube. You've got that comment section down below. Please click that thumbs up icon if you enjoy the content, and that subscribe button if you want to make sure that you don't ever miss a video. Tomorrow we will have the final set review. It will be the colorless cards, the multicolored cards, the land cards, and probably some insights here and there on what I expect the pre-release to be like. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow.